But if I need anyone, I'm on the list.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for being here for our this morning's workshop. We are almost through. I think it's a pleasant atmosphere to have also later on a discussion. So we're not enough, not too many people, but not too empty spaces. So thank you very much for your interest in the workshop on connections between development-related NGO work on the one hand and research on the other. And with this sentence, we are already in the middle of the problem, because all too often development-oriented NGO work and development-oriented research work are two things. Actually, as we all know, there are two sides of one coin. Very often they work on the same topics, with the same goals and objectives, and sometimes even in the same geographical areas. So, any problems with that? Yes. From our experience, from our daily experience, be it in research, be it in NGO work, be it in so-called interdisciplinary research, even so-called transdisciplinary research, we see problems with these two worlds. Both of these worlds meet each other, and today we invited 4 experts from well-known NGOs and well-known research institutes from all over the world. And so we are very happy to have you here. Kat Mooney, for example. He's the winner of the Livelihood Award, the so-called alternative Nobel Prize, and he gained this prize for dedicating his lifetime to save the world's genetic plant heritage in 1985. Second, we have Dr. Hanumapa Sudarshan from India. He's also a winner of the Alternative Nobel Prize, and he got the prize in 1994 for showing how tribal culture in India can contribute to a process that secures the basic rights and fundamental needs of indigenous people and conserves their environment. We also have Dr. Anna Hornich. She's not a winner of the Alternative Nobel Prize. Not yet. researcher of the Center for Development Research here in Bonn, and she's the coordinator of a SEP UNESCO project working on sustainable land and water resource management in Uzbekistan. She's also a member of the project Governance and Diversity in the Straits of Malacca. And last but not least, we have Professor Aram Ziai. He is also working for the Center for Development Research, but he's also a visiting professor at University of Vienna and also working for University of Hamburg. He is an expert on development theories and post-development theories. So he will give the workshop the overall more theoretic approach on development, on ideas of development. What do we understand what development is and what development should be? So I should also mention the initiators, organizers and sponsors of this workshop. First of all, this is the Livelihood College here in Bonn. So this is a newly structured and newly organized college where we try to link the work of the alternative Nobel Prize winners. Already worldwide there are more than 140 of them, and practical, implementation-oriented, interdisciplinary research, especially with younger students, with PhD students, with younger researchers. So we try to link these both worlds from more experienced alternative Nobel Prize winners and younger researchers from all over the world. So this is an international undertaking, and we have colleges in Malaysia, in Lund, Sweden, in Addis Ababa, and here in Bonn. So this college is hosted here in Bonn by the Center for Development Research, which is an international interdisciplinary research institute, part of the University of Bonn, where since more than 10 years we educate and train PhD students from all over the world in English courses with their research topics. So they can apply with their own ideas, their own research ideas, and they can conduct a 3 years research in the countries, in the area where they come from. So this is the basic idea. Okay, we have 4 speakers today, and so this is, we do not have that much time for speakers, but I think we have enough time at the end, and I intend to have maybe 20-30 minutes for an open discussion, and I really would like to ask you if you could contribute with your ideas, maybe critical remarks. Please do not hesitate to be as critical as you want to be. But first of all, I would like to ask Dr. Ahmad Sudarshan to give his presentation.
Thank you for this opportunity to share my experience of working with indigenous people in India for the last 31 years. For those who are not aware of the indigenous people in India, they form 8% of the population, and mostly they are in the central India and northeastern India. We also need to understand the indigenous people are called scheduled tribes in India. It's the name British gave, and we continue with that. And we need to distinguish them from scheduled castes. The scheduled castes are amongst the caste group. They are part of the civilization but are oppressed by the upper caste. So there are, again, the indigenous people. We have very large groups, more than 1 million population, and there are vanishing tribes. Very briefly, I will be sharing about them. Sorry. Okay. I also had the opportunity of working with these vanishing tribes in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Government of India has established a committee for policy making on these tribes. So these are great Andamanis. There are just 45 of them left in a Strait Island, Delhi. Mongays in the Little Andaman about 300 people, Jarvas about 200, Shonpens, and Sentinels are the only people who have no contact with the civilization. Again, about 100 of them. These are real vanishing tribes, and the policy at present is the Jarvas, that is, the mainlanders have come and occupied their land, and the whole policy is to see that they have access to the natural resources and least interference with them. These are the Jarvas on this side, and the two other on the other side are the Great Andamanis. These are the Negrito tribes. I started my work with the Soriga tribes. This is in Karnataka, 200 kilometers from Bangalore. They belong to the Vedad group. They are basically shifting cultivators, food gatherers and hunters. These are some of the pictures. It's a wildlife sanctuary. It's a junction of eastern and western Ghats in the South India, and now it has been declared as a tiger reserve. The tribal culture, basically they believe in living in harmony with nature. This is very important because the alienation from nature is the key factor why the whole climate change and all that we are talking about, sustainable development, the ethos, the tribal culture is that living in harmony, establish the harmonious relationship with the nature, and we need to do that. And for them there is no secular and this sacred concept. Everything is sacred for them. Nature itself is the God. Basically take what you need for your livelihood and give back to the nature. I'll be explaining a little more about how they integrate the head and heart, the feminine and the masculine concept. This is a big champak tree. It's a tropical tree with a yellow fragrant flowers. This is the most sacred tree for them. They worship this tree. It is about 600 years old tree. I'm a medical doctor. Went there with the tribals. I was inspired by Albert Schweitzer to work in a remote area. So started with curative health services, then I found a lot of the whooping cough and other epidemics, so became community health. Then I found I didn't have pills for poverty because they had no access to the natural resources. So the concept of community development, and now because we are in the biological hotspot there, a sustainable development, how the livelihood of the tribal people and biodiversity conservation can go together. It was a gradual evolution. So the basic principles of tribal development, the term development has its own problems, but I'm still using that word. The basic principles are live with the tribal people, understand their strengths, understand their traditional knowledge systems and build on it. I think very often we go with the idea that they are ignorant and we need to teach them. I think that arrogance of going with that type of attitude is wrong. Fortunately, I understood that arrogance I had and gave up and tried to understand, respect diversity and build on their strengths. We have tried to understand the traditional knowledge system. It's a very difficult task. Traditional health practices has been my main understanding, which I have done for the last 31 years. I still remember my first case of delivery. She refused to lie down on my obstetric table. Then we found out with the traditional birth attendant that they deliver in squatting posture. And today, squatting posture is the main way we conduct deliveries. Only when they have complications, we put them on this so-called obstetric table, which is much more convenient for the doctors and nurses and not for the mother who gives birth. We also done some work on traditional agriculture, organic traditional seed varieties. We speak about sustainable healthcare, where it's a comprehensive primary healthcare concept, understanding the traditional health and building on it, empowering people to manage themselves. The health of the tribal people, if you look at their profile, it's very interesting. We have tribal people within the core area of the forest and the wildlife sanctuary. There are people who are at the periphery and people who are totally alienated from the forest. People who are living within the core area, I'm yet to find a colonic cancer, no appendicitis, no ischemic heart diseases, no hypertension, no diabetes. But people who are alienated from forest, all these problems plus HIV, AIDS, STD, sexually transmitted diseases are all seen in the people who are totally alienated from the forest. Now, understanding the traditional medicine, one is their health practices, also their herbal knowledge of medicines, fairly good. And we find at present about 30 to 35% of the primary healthcare problems can be managed with their traditional knowledge they have about the herbs and the health practices. For example, that's an Adatoda Osaka, the picture below, which is a very good cough remedy. We don't buy any of the cough syrups for our primary healthcare, which are basically colorful bottles with 5% alcohol and sugary syrup with few paise worth of antihistamine. So instead of that, boil 2-3 leaves of this Adatoda Osaka and there's a very good cough remedy. So trying to integrate the traditional medicine with that. And the cost effectiveness, I'm sure those who are the other health systems, the cost of primary health care, which we are now providing for almost 1 million indigenous people in various parts of India, costs about 100 rupees, 1.5 euros per person per year. $2 is what I'm saying, which is very, very cost effective to provide primary health care. I'm not talking about tertiary care, but primary health care is definitely much cheaper. And traditional medicines are low cost and they are locally available. Also appropriate health technologies, and we have better health outcomes. We also made a community-based health insurance for tertiary care. This is with the UNDP, probably the lowest premium in the world. This is 30 rupees per person per year, and when they are hospitalized, the 50 rupees is given for the daily wages they lose and also for the additional cost of the drugs. We had about 1 lakh premiums and it's running well. The innovations in tribal education, the national policy is to thrust the mainstream education on them, but we argued and fought for a policy for tribal education. We have revolved a textbook in their own dialect, which is about their environment, it's about their culture. And that has been accepted by the government now and gradually transition into the local language. We started a school with 6 children. I'm happy to say 4 of them have become postgraduates, and many of them are. The Jadia has done his PhD, and he is the president of our organization now. And I still remember in the school they had a competition. They had to go to the forest, collect the leaf of a plant or tree, and write down the name in their own traditional name. The one mother, he later on did his MSc botany. When he was 12 years old, I could identify about 180 plants and trees. This is the traditional knowledge they had. The only difference I find now is that he knows all the Latin names after getting the master's degree. So he knows this tremendous traditional knowledge system which they have. We have forestry college now, and we have women's self-help groups and income generation activities. Basically based on the minor forest produce. This is the honey processing unit. We get very good wild honey which they collect and process it. Lantana is a very big weed in the forest, so how to extract lantana and then make furniture out of it. The cane is the better one, but cane has become very scarce in the forest, so use lantana, which is also you remove the weed and make use of it for furniture. Community organization has been empowering the people is very important. We have hamlet level to taluka and district level. First time they are participating in our decentralized democratic system. We have even a district level membership at present. They also do need-based planning and submit it to the district authorities. Land alienation has been a very serious problem, and most of the land alienated they have got it back. And I've been fighting for their land since 31 years. Just 6 months back, all the indigenous people in BR Hills have got the land rights. We are in the process of getting community rights. Probably next week they will also have the titles for the land. Each hamlet will have the access to the natural resources, basically community rights, the non-timber forest produce, and also right to conserve the forest. That will be another big step very soon. This is the community participation. We do sustainable agriculture. As I said, Jadia has done his master's degree on the tribal. His thesis is also about traditional agriculture practices of indigenous people. We also have alternate sources of energy, micro hydroelectric projects, conserving traditional seed varieties. 50% of the livelihood depends on the collection of minor forest produce, and we are working with Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology, another research group, and showing that last 12 years data that collection of non-timber crops produce will not hamper the biodiversity. We can do sustainable harvesting of them. So the livelihood and of the tribal people and biodiversity conservation can go together. There have been a big, this is a wildlife sanctuary with a lot of elephants, and recently they found 45 tiger population, so it has been declared as a tiger reserve. So a lot of the big tourist groups like Taj and very big hotel groups are trying to come there. So before they come and occupy that place, we said let us have a community-based ecotourism. So the Soliga themselves have started a community-based ecotourism. They take them for safari and show them, and they are the naturalists, trained naturalists, and the income goes for the tribal development. We have very strong Forest Act, a Wildlife Act and a Biodiversity Act. We are proud of it in India. But all these acts never talked about the rights of the tribal people, the indigenous people. And fortunately now we have what is called Tribal Forest Rights Act, which the act itself starts with the first sentence is, for the historical injustice done to the indigenous tribal people, this act has been promulgated. And we are very happy with that act. We got the land rights for all the tribal people now. We have looked at the deforestation which has happened in the BR Hills. Very often it's the indigenous people are blamed for it, but we have enough evidence. But we need a research evidence for that. These are simple documentation. We need, that's what I will be talking about. So we have shown clearly it is not the tribal people. It was the various bad management of forest, monoculture, forest fire, smuggling, poaching, granite, corruption, various other big dams and quarrying which have resulted in the deforestation. The community participation in biodiversity conservation is also very important. As I said, the community rights speaks not only about what rights they have, also their responsibility for conservation. So we have various conservation which they are trying to do in this area. The community, the tiger reserve, whenever in India a tiger reserve is declared, tiger conservationists are very strong that people should not live in that area. They try to displace, they try to give them some money and see that they take the compensation and get displaced. So we are trying to show that this is a new model which we want the government to accept it, that they will not get displaced. They don't want this compensation in money with rupees, but they will continue to do the community-based tiger conservation. They as partners in the conservation, and they can provide that. Hopefully we will convince the government to accept it. There is also a lot of misconception about, with the health background, the environment and population explosion. In the indigenous people, it's not a problem at all. And what we are showing is the problem of so-called population explosion is a myth for me. What we need to do is not catching people and sterilizing them as it was done by one of our prime ministers during the emergency period, but provide good primary health care and convince the mother that 2 children born to her will not die of acute respiratory infections or diarrheal disease. So provide good primary health care, automatically they will accept the small family norms. We also extended our work to Northeast. Northeast we have Arunachal Pradesh. We also work in Meghalaya and Mizoram. These are some of the primary health centers in very primitive, very interior places. We take up those challenges. Some of the primary health centers during the rainy season they have to cross through by elephants. The ferries cannot touch the ground. So very difficult one. And this is during the rainy season, monsoons, the hamlets are cut off. And this is the health worker trained by us, and she is going on the roadway to provide immunization and health care. Now we are scaling up, we are in 5 states, and we are scaling up very soon to the other parts in the very interior places. So what are the lessons we learned from the indigenous people? As I said, earlier I have said, this is the lessons we, the so-called civilized people who talk about sustainable development. If we want to understand sustainable development, we need to learn from the culture. It's not just the left-right concept of sustainable development, it's whole culture, it's the understanding nature, it's their philosophy, their worldview, it's about the nature mysticism, all that is packaged. It's not just a concept of sustainable development, which is important. So it's a way of life. They are the real practitioners of sustainable development. We may call it a sustainable development, that's their way of life. And I personally feel conservation of biodiversity, and especially in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, just leave them and the conservation will happen and their livelihood also can go together. And I believe in a holistic approach to sustainable development, sustainable health, education, agriculture, other livelihoods, and decentralized participatory governance. They are all packages. They are all together. Now, coming to today's topic, NGO work and research opportunities, I call them opportunities. The opportunities is that the community-based NGOs, we have very poor documentation, we don't develop evidence-based type of research which can convince the world, so we need to really complement each other. There is also need for innovative community-based research and documentation of the sustainable development of indigenous people. We also, NGOs, we build small islands of excellence and talk much about it, but we need to really document and then scale it up. Now, what are the constraints? These are the egos of the NGOs. The activists always feel proud that the researchers are they're not grassroots level and and the researchers feel NGOs don't know much about scientific evidence and we need to teach them. So we need to give up. I think it's not versus activists versus researchers, it's complementarity. We need to work together. And there's need for multidisciplinary cross-cutting type of research, and using the right and appropriate tools for research is very important. Now, convince the traditional medicine. If I try to evaluate or validate the traditional medicine from allopathic modern medicine framework, I don't think I will succeed in that. We need to understand the traditional medicine from their own framework. We can't do it from the so-called scientific, modern scientific, technological, evidence-based type of thing, or analyzing a herb with a chemical and then say this is how it affects. I think we need to understand the traditional medicine in its own entirety and do it. Similarly, demystification of research is also very important. Very often researchers come and they know the way, and then why can't we empower the local people to do their own research, longitudinal research? We need to really think of demystifying research. And we need researchers with commitment and passion. Very often I find researchers coming, staying for a few days and then write their thesis and get their PhDs. What we need today is not that type of research. People who can stay, live with the people, understand their strengths, and then document and do research on that is what is really needed. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'm Mapa Sudashan. So I found it especially interesting when you were talking about the cost effectiveness in the health sector of your NGO, and I mean the figure of $2.5 per person per year for healthcare, primary healthcare is amazing, really. So, and also on the other hand, it also gives, I think, a very good example how you started more than 30 years ago with one idea as a medical doctor, but then shifted to issues like education, and from there you came to land tenure, and from there to agriculture, and from there to the environment. So I think it gives a very good idea about how these topics are interrelated. Okay, so I think we can continue with Anna Hornich. As I mentioned beforehand, she's working for the Center for Development Research here in Bonn, and on the project in Uzbekistan. And today she will present the approach of transdisciplinary research, which is relatively new in the researcher world, I would say. And they developed a concept that's called Follow the Innovation. And this is currently implemented in Uzbekistan in the Khorasan region. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming and for this opportunity to introduce you to one of our components in the Uzbekistan project of the Center for Development Research. I will now, with this small component, take you to Central Asia, to northwestern Uzbekistan. We are looking at a project that has been running since 2001. It's a 10-year-long research project. We are now at the end of the third phase. And the main aim of this project, BMBF funded, that's the German Ministry for Education and Research. The main aims were to develop recommendations and simulation tools for improving agricultural policies in Uzbekistan and, if possible, even then the region, to develop concepts of restructuring land and water use, and for doing so to develop innovation packages that would potentially cause or enable the development, sustainable development in the Khorasan region. So very high objectives, and how can they be reached? Well, this is of course a very difficult question, and we have tried to answer them in very different ways. What I will now introduce to you, as said, is a small part in this project. We call it the Follow the Innovation component. It's the idea that in the first two phases, basically the first 6 years of the project, we developed a few innovations that might actually pose at least the promise that they could lead to localized improvement. So we then wanted to take some of these innovations up and develop them together further with local stakeholders, basically based on the idea that you mentioned the come and go PhD research that is maybe a good starting point, but not actually leading to solutions. So the idea was to take some of the ideas that were developed mainly as PhD research up and localize these ideas by basically checking them together with local potential end users, farmers or water managers, as well as in some aspects policymakers, how we could modify them to the degree that they actually could change something. So in this thinking, we were basically inspired by thoughts and discussions on social construction of science and technology, but also by the Follow the Technology approach by Southside, working for the CGIR system. So basically the idea that one takes a technology, or as we then said, not just technologies, but also maybe institutional innovations, and introduces them into the local system, and then lets local end users, potential end users, experiment with these and see how together one could modify them. So we were also then inspired by ongoing debates on transdisciplinarity. Here a quote by Brewer: "The world has problems, the universities have departments." A quote that very much, of course, hints into the direction of this potentially increasing divide between the ivory tower of academia and real-life problems in many parts of the world. So that was sort of the conceptual inspiration behind this component, and as said, we had altogether 19 innovations or innovation packages, of which we thought, well, there are actually good ideas for this area of the world, but do they, out of the perspective of local people, also make sense? Or just out of the perspective of local, but also to a large extent foreign researchers? So we took these plausible promises and wanted to then experiment together with local stakeholders and to see whether we can develop a locally embedded approach to outscale these innovations in the end. And we decided that this approach cannot just be about developing and working with these innovations, but at the same time has to have a very strong capacity building component, capacity building on the individual level, within the project team, as well as in the transdisciplinary team. Basically, the team consisted of researchers as well as local stakeholders, and researchers from many different disciplines. As well as on the institutional level, this capacity building, basically working with institutions and here also organizations, basically like water user associations, on issues of institutional management. This is the capacity building that we encountered. We worked together closely with ETC in the Netherlands, who advised us on different approaches to innovation experimentation with local stakeholders, as well as then also how to basically throughout the whole process of experimenting with these different innovation packages. We decided, we discussed how we would want to go about it, and this is basically the stepwise approach that we came up with. We said, first of all, we need to narrow ourselves down and identify a few innovations that we can experiment further with. Then we have to form transdisciplinary groups, meaning we need to first of all identify the local stakeholders that could be interested and willing to also work with us together over a period of 3.5 years, which is of course not very short and requires a lot of ownership also on the side of the stakeholders. And then of course we started these, or wanted to start and did start these processes of systematic experimentation and adjusting, and thought that we would basically construct this open loop where we would experiment with the innovations, see how local stakeholders reflect, or how the local stakeholders experiment with these innovations, what their main downsides or limitations are with regard to the innovations, and how they can be, how the innovations then have to be modified in order to overcome these limitations, or whether we maybe also did conduct research that is of no value to local stakeholders, that could also be an outcome of this process. So as said, we selected 4 innovations, or actually innovation packages, which was first of all various tree species with which we hope to forestate some of the marginal lands, which can be used as fodder production, as well as of course help the salinized soils to regenerate. Then an advanced tool for rapid salinity assessment, EM38, in order to improve irrigation scheduling. It's an area that 100% depends on irrigation. It's an irrigated agriculture. Then conservation agriculture, a very big innovation package, of course, as well as an institutional approach, and this is the only institutional innovation to strengthening water user associations through a social mobilization and institutional development approach. So we formed teams, we selected stakeholders, we wrote roadmaps, and we then indulged into systematic experimenting, and it varied a little bit from team to team whether the experimentation was basically 80% driven by the local stakeholders, or whether it was more done as a joint experimentation. So the degree whether the process was more one of joint experimentation or more characterized as a sort of laissez-faire approach, basically the research team suggesting, introducing innovation, but then local stakeholders experimenting with those by themselves, and us just being sort of potential backstoppers, ranged a little from team to team. But of course, this process and some of your presentation also pointed to the potential difficulties and also potential drawbacks, which I will come to now. First of all, I think it is important to mention that it was successful in the sense that 3 of these 4 innovations were later, in May 2010, also then introduced to the parliament in Uzbekistan, and are now checked by a local research center for further potential upscaling. This is a success. Another information maybe that is, before I turn to the challenges, also important to notice that the local postdocs, the local researchers that basically were educated within the realm of this project and then mainly fostered these innovation processes. They founded a local NGO now, Horizon Rural Advisory Support Service, CRUS as an abbreviation, and are hoping to basically take some of the learnings from these processes as well as the innovation, some of the adjusted innovation packages themselves on, and also act as basically advisory service organization in the region in the future. So this would be sort of some of the key successes of these processes, I think. Then of course, I mean, you see the more ordinary aspect here, challenges here, administrative challenges. There were very many, and I think that will not be news to most of you. Then we encountered quite a few different difficulties and challenges with the team composition and organization itself here, especially also aspects of the team division. Some of the teams early on decided to separate team members into core team members and support team members, which partly also negatively then affected the motivation of some of the maybe support team members. Then of course the difference against Bonn caused quite a few problems, but these are sort of more the ordinary normal challenges. I think more interesting and more for us even bigger lessons in these processes were actually what we learned with regards to the interaction of different knowledge systems here. It was very clear that Uzbekistan is a highly hierarchically organized society. It's an authoritarian system with a very high level of self-censorship. At the same time, the researchers were, for large part in the first phase of this project, considered as guests, and you are not very critical to guests. So it took a lot of time to basically build a trustful relationship on both sides, very much so, to actually allow for mutual exchange of different types of knowledge. And that also has then again very many implications for the administrative challenges. If you want to build good levels of trust, you need well-trained local staff. You need well-trained local staff that is there on a continuous basis. And for this you need certain, first of all, legal framing of the whole project, and you also need financial backing. Furthermore, we encountered, especially on the side of us, the research team, quite a few issues with regard to scientists versus farmers' knowledge. You spoke of the demystification of research that is necessary. That was also something that we had to learn and are surely still in the learning process. We encountered, and this is actually true on the side of the researchers as well as on the side of the local stakeholders, a very strong belief in linear thinking. If you introduce this, it will trigger that, and the outcome is a betterment, which is, of course, in a social system environment not actually the case. So we had to overcome many of the ideas of that we would raise awareness or convince stakeholders, and realize it's not about raising awareness, it's not about convincing anyone, it's about learning together. We also had to encounter the best bet dilemma, this whole discussion of these innovations sort of being the babies of some of our researchers for many years. They fostered these babies for many years, and now suddenly they were supposed to be changed, but maybe then they wouldn't make sense anymore out of a research perspective, or not as much pose a possible promise anymore. So how much would we have to actually change the context to make it fit the innovation, or the innovation, which was the actual idea, to change the innovation to fit the context? We of course, and you might have noticed when I introduced you to the selected innovations, we looked at innovation packages, most of them, big innovations with high costs involved, with the need of long-term application in order to actually lead to change. So it became obvious we needed to unbundle some of our innovation packages. Conservation agriculture, for example, poses, it's sort of in the realm of partly illegality. If you ask a farmer in Uzbekistan who works under a state plan, who prescribes what he plants, how he plants it, when he plants it, if you then ask, well, don't plow that, and don't do it when in terms of timing, don't do it when the state plan requires it, that moves into the area of partly illegality. So it poses a problem. You cannot expect this from a local stakeholder to then adopt it. Okay, and then the last part of the challenges was that it simply led to many open questions and questions that we had to solve. Questions of how much software or how much hardware did we need to allow if we wanted to foster an institutional innovation. A water user association that is large in area and geographic size, and where the water managers do not have any forms of transport in order to move from one end of the water user association to the other end within one day. How can we strengthen this institution actually if we don't enable these water managers to actually do their work by maybe using a bike to ride from gate to gate to open or close it. So this discussion, how much hardware do we need in order to facilitate the software? Also the salesman challenge. What do we do if stakeholders are simply not interested? When do we say, well, obviously they're not interested, so we shelve it? Or did we just speak to the wrong stakeholders? Yeah, discussions like this. Aspects of high versus low external input technologies. I mentioned conservation agriculture. Well, it's cost intensive. You need an adjusted seeder. You need a laser leveler. How do we enable local stakeholders to be able to afford this? So it was all about writing proposals together in order to acquire the funding. And then, of course, ongoing debate, always the aspect of international versus local fame on the side of the researchers. Do I want to contribute to a local improving of the local situation with my research, but will never have my science, publication in science with this type of research, or do I want to concentrate on my own discipline and get hope for international fame, basically? It's the scientist's dilemma. So, and this is my last slide. There were several lessons that we had to learn, and as said, we are still in the learning process, of course. With regard to the innovations, it became very obvious that the main stumbling blocks with regard to these selected innovations in that context were the legal requirements, the innovation complexity, the finances needed, and the time here on purpose mentioned as the last one. With regards to transdisciplinary processes, well, timing is crucial. Introduce it from project start. We introduced it after 6 years, maybe a little late. Resources, you need substantial time and financial resources. I think there we did actually very well. We had budgeted quite well for this. You need to clarify goals and priorities at the beginning. We probably could have done this a lot more. Then the team interaction needs to be systematic, continuous, and well documented. This was a real challenge for us researchers. This was somehow clear, something that had not to be discussed. it became very clear that it had to be actually discussed, and we should have discussed it a lot more at the beginning. So also there, a learning process had to take place. The facilitation and capacity building, as said, yes, there's of course a risk to create a dependency trap, and one has to very much take this into account. We needed to regularly reassess our plausible promises and stakeholders. I think that is something that we could not avoid, basically, and were therefore nearly sort of by the process themselves forced to do so. And in order to allow this mutual exchange of knowledge, yes, we had to very much learn what we said, to overcome feelings of superiority but also inferiority, and create flat hierarchies, invest into building trust, and for this, the true interest on both sides, the feeling of ownership in the process is crucial. And especially also with regard to flat hierarchies, we had to also realize that the project team in the Uzbek context, at least I only want to speak for that context, also acts as a role model, which means that if you hope to create flat hierarchies in the transdisciplinary team, then you first of all have to create it in the interdisciplinary team, in the research team. So, we learned a lot, but I think it was, and as such it was a very successful process. So, thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this insight in the transdisciplinary approaches of trying to bridging the gaps between research and practice, in practice. And you mentioned lots of very, very important things, and I hope at the end we have some more minutes to discuss that, and please, if you have some questions, write them down, or so keep them for the end. So now we will immediately rush into the next presentation by Mr. Kret. Thank you.
Thank you. In 15 minutes, and please, if you monitor the time, give me about a 2-minute warning. I'll stick to that. I'm going to try to do 3 things, and I'm going to have to do it pretty rapidly. First, I'm going to try to be positive. It's hard for me, but I'll work on it. And say which I think are actually the most important things in the sense of...
Switch off the second micro, please.
And then, after being positive rather briefly, I will be negative about the relationships I see between academia or between public sector research and peasant research. And then, thirdly, I hope in the last remaining 2 minutes or so, I will go back to being positive again about what I think are some solutions to the situation. The positives are important, though, because first of all, I have to say that in my experience, when I talk about public research, it's not simply academia or government research, it's also NGO research, the kind of research that I get involved in my organization, which is an NGO. So we are, I hope, sometimes part of the solution, but we're also often, my group, the Tetra group, is part of the problem as well. And we find ourselves, even after decades, still venturing into the situation where we realize, oops, we did it wrong. We did what we were accusing everybody else of. So I'm part of that. I also have to say that I think is critical in the next few decades as we try to address climate chaos and all the other problems we've been talking about the last few days here. We actually have to have a partnership between so-called high-tech research and what I call light-tech research. We can't survive without it, as much as I would like to dream sometimes, and I'm told sometimes that peasant production can solve the food crisis by itself and can address climate change by itself. I think that farmers' organizations have too often been reading the stuff that I've been writing about romanticism about agriculture. And the truth is that I don't think they can. I think that the reality is that neither peasant production and peasant research have experienced what they're about to experience in the past or in the future. We're not prepared, peasant agriculture is not prepared to address climate change, and neither is the sort of industrial model of research or the public sector research that we see. So we need each other. I also have to say that in my encounters with other public researchers, overwhelmingly the researchers are doing their best are trying hard, are working with, I think, hard to estimate constraints in terms of finances and institutional problems, and forbear and struggle and do their utmost to make the best of what is often a very bad situation. So anything I say that's critical is not to be critical of the individuals. They're trying hard, and I've often met people in the field kind of in tears because they just can't do what they know they should do. They just don't have the resources they need. They don't have the support at home to get the job done. So it's not in any way a critique of those individuals who know better and want to do better and often do amazingly fine work, in fact. So much for the positive. I want to give some examples of the negative, of where the relationship has been terrible and continues to be terrible today. When I've done this other times, I've been told, I'm talking about 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we know better now. We've understood all that. We now have our farmer schools and so on, where we've got a whole new rapport between the public researcher, the academic community, and the farming community, and it's great now. We've read the books and understood the lessons. I don't believe that. And I'll give some examples of recent times of that. A couple of years ago, less than that, 18 months ago, I'll try to not name the organizations because they're good people again. There was an effort to create a dialogue, an international negotiation around farmers' rights, which is part of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources that's held at FAO. Farmers' rights is there, but it's not real in terms of it's a functioning sort of part of a legally binding agreement, a treaty. And so there's been efforts by some very good researchers, very concerned in industrialized countries, and partners in the South, and governments to try to work together and say, okay, how can we turn farmers' rights and the rights of farmers to save and exchange seeds, for example, into a reality? How can we overcome the sort of regulatory barriers and patent barriers that make that impossible to do? In the creation of a negotiation on farmers' rights, which is finally held in Zimbabwe, when the very good people put together the list of who's coming to the table to negotiate, and an off-the-records private consultation of about 40 people or so, there wasn't a farmer invited. Not one. No farmers' organizations were at the table. Well, in the invitation list, there was such a fuss made that finally I think they found someone local. I refused to attend myself. It was convenient to do because I couldn't be there anyways, for other reasons. But so don't give me too much credit. They finally did find a local farmers' organization to attend. You didn't know anything about the international dynamics of the situation, but they at least were able to sit at the table, looking slightly stunned and wondering why they were there. It's just amazing. And the same thing happened again a few months ago when another round of negotiations on farmers' rights took place, this time in Ethiopia. It was a global negotiation of about 50 people. I was there. They finally did have 3 farmers' organizations present out of about the 50 people who were present, who knew something more. They knew from the embarrassment of the last time, they just couldn't go through that a second time, so they did learn out of embarrassment. But still, not a good experience. Going back a year ago as well, the FAO organized, I can't remember the name of it now, it was a lovely acronym called ABCD, and it was related to biotechnology, I forget what it all stood for. But the goal of the global meeting on biotechnology, which took place in Guadalajara, was to look at biotechnology as a service to small farmers, to smallholders, I think was the term they used. That was the goal. And the process of dialogue leading up to the global consultation, intergovernmental consultation, was about 2 years in the making. We were initially invited, the Central Group was initially invited to be on the steering committee for that. We went to the first meeting, there were no farmers organizations present, we quit the steering committee, explaining why we were quitting. We were asked back about a year later, saying, couldn't you please come back to the steering committee? We said, only if other farmers organizations are invited to it, because we're not a farmers organization. FAO said, don't worry, we'll have them there. We went back, they weren't there, we quit again. So we actually quit the steering committee twice, which is embarrassing for all of us. And finally, the farmers' organizations in Mexico at least got together and asked if they could actually attend the meeting in Guadalajara, this intergovernmental meeting on how to help smallholders. And they were told they couldn't because I'd been invited and I was going to be the representative. Which got me into a lot of trouble. And of course, at the end of the day, of course, I didn't attend on behalf of, I did attend, but not as a representative of anybody. And I didn't let them pay for me, of course, my organization paid. And we actually had a counter conference of smallholders organizations that met in protest and got much more publicity than the FAO conference got at the end of the day. The tragedy of it all, though frankly, was that in the actual intergovernmental meeting that took place, and everyone kept on talking about, we've got to work with smallholders, peasant production is actually critical to us, and so on, in every field. Constant refrain of that everywhere in the meeting. And most of the people who were there were academics more than they were government diplomats. For all of that, at the end of it all, 3 of those who had been invited to make presentations there did get out in the final time and say, you've got to put into the final statement that all further dialogues and discussions don't involve, among the stakeholders, that word stakeholders I want to talk about, must include peasant organizations as such. They must be part of that. And the chair of the conference, who was from WWF, because Sloan Athens wasn't able to attend the last minute, the chair of the conference at the front of the room said, no, we talked about that before, we don't need to put that into the final declaration. So he wouldn't accept even the notion that farmers' organizations should actually be part of the discussion. When the farmers' organizations tried to get into the room, finally, after a great deal of struggle, one representative was allowed into sit at the back of the room in the plenary. That was it. So that carries on. And with nice people, even. There was I can stick to Mexico, some other examples of this. A few years ago, it was going back now 3 or 4 years, the CGR was having its annual meeting in Mexico City. And I was called up and asked if I could attend a meeting in advance of the CGIR's annual meeting because they wanted to discuss their biotech research with farmers' organizations. And I asked who was going to be there from the farmers' organizations, and they said, I was. My kids wouldn't even let me into the garden. No way am I a farmer. And so of course we said we couldn't do that. And so, well, could I suggest who could go there? Well, I mean, it turned out that 2 hotels down and 3 stars down from the hotel that the CGR was meeting in, UNORCA, the largest farmers' peasant organization in Mexico, was having its annual meeting at the same time. It was entirely accidental, but they were. And so we said, well, why don't you invite UNORCA? They'd never heard of UNORCA. They didn't know they existed. And the inviters were CIMMYT. CIMMYT is the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center in Mexico, based in Mexico. It's been there since the 1940s. UNORCA's been there since the 1940s. And UNORCA knew about CIMMYT, but CIMMYT didn't know about UNORCA. UNORCA, this image that somehow is that peasants, they don't have time to come to meetings. They're too busy milking the cow all the time. And yet, UNORCA's got accountants, UNORCA's got lawyers, much to the regret of the Mexican government. It's got sociologists, it's got anthropologists, it's got all kinds of folks working with them on their staff sometimes, or at least working with them in partnerships. They can take care of themselves. But they didn't even know they were there. And that, and these are the good guys. These are the public sector guys, not talking about Monsanto here. Same thing happened a couple of years before that, which is when the Biodiversity International, which had another name at that time in Rome, was concerned about GM contamination of the maize crop in Mexico. It's interesting, the scientific word was contamination, but after industry got hold of it, it became adventitious presence. It sounds like Advent, it sounds like a gift. And so they, anyway, Biodiversity International decided they want to have a conference on the possible implications of the adventitious presence of GM maize in Mexico, in the Center of Diversity in Mexico. And again, I was invited to attend, and I said I couldn't, the farmers' organization should attend, and again they said, could you name some? They had no idea. It is beyond my comprehension. If you're going to have a meeting to talk about maize contamination in Mexico, farmers' organizations in Mexico have been complaining about maize contamination at that point for about 4 years. And yet there was no ability to even figure out who to invite. it goes on. And I think, again, I would argue that perhaps 95% of the time, and I don't think I'm exaggerating at all, 95% of the time, a public-private partnership, or a public-peasant partnership in this case, is predatory, actually, or parasitic. It actually abuses the relationships and disadvantages the peasants who are involved in the process. And that hasn't changed over the decades that I've been involved in this work since the 1970s. I've not noticed any improvement. I was at a meeting a couple of years ago where the head of the Rockefeller Foundation's agriculture program, which doesn't exist really anymore, said it would be good. And I was saying, why don't you have representatives of farmers' organizations here at the table in the CGIR? And he said, that would be a good idea, but they don't have time to come to meetings like this. Again, like they're all just milking cows out there and they've got to be home in the evening. That they aren't structured and organized. That there isn't something called the Via Campesina, which represents about 600 million farmers around the world. That they don't exist. They do exist. But no one thinks about that. How much time do I have?
Okay, so I think we're almost done.
Can I
1 minute.
Can I be positive at the end? Okay. Okay. There are solutions to this because I think there is goodwill on everybody's side. It's there. The solution is give up the money. The solution is if we, as the NGO or the academic institution, are the ones who have set the budget, are the ones who determine how the budget will be spent, who make the changes to the budget during the course of the process, and can finally write the checks. If that's where the responsibility is, it's going to get screwed up. Share the budget. And I don't mean give them a bit of it. I mean sit down together from the beginning and negotiate the budget. In most cases with peasant organizations, they've got the bank accounts, they've got the accountants. They can, I don't mean in every case in every place, but they can participate in that process. But as long as the so-called good guys who are just out there to do the academic good are in charge of the budget and want to be the ones who get their name on the paper at the end of the day, then this relationship will not change. I'm out of time.
Thank you very much, Ben Mooney, for this very interesting talk among many years of experience from both sides, I would say. And I found it very interesting that you said at the beginning there is no such dichotomy between research and NGOs as it's often perceived. But it's also very interesting to hear from you that your estimation is that about 95% of public private partnerships is predatory. And this is also what, from our research and from our projects all over the world, we perceive, and we still see that. Okay, so I would like to ask Aram for his presentation on breaking up the consensus, some reflections on development work. So please be short, but I know you will be short and critical, so okay, please.
Okay, thank you too. Well, I've got a difficult task of keeping you awake as a last speaker, and on top of that, with a rather abstract and theoretical topic. My talk is entitled Breaking Up the Consensus and Reflections on Development Work. And what I will be talking on is, first of all, the relevance of discourse, and then the discourse of development and its implications and the productive misunderstandings it leads to. Now, in the end, I will draw a short conclusion. Why would I do this? Because my central question now today is, how can post-structuralist discourse analysis be useful for development NGOs? This is the ivory tower where I come from. On the other hand, I've been also working with development NGOs. And now, the short answer to this question is because this post-structuralist discourse analysis can give us a perspective on the contingency of our conceptions, of our thinking, and provide alternatives maybe. The long answer is the rest of my talk today. Okay, now, the relevance of discourse. What is discourse in any case? Now, in the social sciences, since the so-called linguistic turn, it is widely been acknowledged that language not only represents, but actually constructs our social reality. The most prominent and everyday example would be a group like the FARC in Colombia, which are portrayed from the one side as terrorists, from the other as freedom fighters. Now, the different perception, a group of armed people fighting somewhere, being portrayed on the one hand as terrorists, on the other as freedom fighters, obviously has massive political consequences. Now, discourse analysis tries to give us a systematic attempt of, well, monitoring these consequences. Discourses in this context are seen as systems of relations between words and things, between signifiers and signifieds. Now, discourses does provide, on top of that, certain statements, images, and arguments. Now, to be a little bit more concrete, post-structured discourse analysis builds on the structural linguistics of some Swiss guy named Ferdinand de Saussure, who lived at the beginning of the 20th century. And his conception said, okay, the smallest unit carrying meaning in our language is the sign. And the sign is composed of the signifier, word tree in the English language, and the signified. This is what we mean when we use this word. Now, so far so good. The post-structuralists actually argued, okay, but this relation between signifier and signified is not only arbitrary, but is context-dependent. In different contexts, different signifiers can have different meanings, obviously. Now, if we look at development discourse, we quickly learn that the word development, that the signifier development, is linked to a host of different signifiers. If we look at development practice, we see that the term actually designates sometimes school education for girls, improved political participation, improved access to water, higher agricultural productivity, sustainable resource use, transparent government, good governance, or simply road building. On the other hand, critics point out that in practice, development also designates market liberalization in many cases, simply the investment of multinational companies, commercialization of nature in the context of biotechnology, well-paid jobs for some, usually supporters of the local government, forced resettlement and evictions in the context of dams, especially in India, population control, birth control in some areas. We also heard already about forced sterilizations, or even, for example, in Guatemala in the 80s, methods of counterinsurgency. Now, if development signifies all this host of heterogeneous interventions, then one cannot conclude but that more or less any intervention can be called development, provided it is a non-political intervention in the name of the common good. If we have a look at these interventions, all of them have been presented as non-political interventions, because politics is the realm of conflict. There are opposing parties, opposing worldviews, opposing ideologies, but development is none of this. Development is like mother's apple pie. No one can be against development. Development pursues the common good. So, non-political intervention in the name of the common good. Second condition is based on expert knowledge. This is where the legitimacy of these development interventions derives from, because they're based on science, because they're based on expert knowledge. Third one, if we look at how the term development is used, these development interventions are located in the global south, because these are the developing countries, the underdeveloped countries. This is where development takes place, because in the north, everything is fine, we are already developed. So, I argue that this conception now has certain implications, Eurocentric, depoliticizing, and authoritarian implications, and that it leads to productive misunderstandings. On these 2 points, I will elaborate now for a few minutes. Implications, Eurocentric implications in the first place, because in development discourse, European societies are still seen as the norm, as the developed societies, in contrast to the less developed societies anywhere else in the world. Inferior versions of the norm, indicating that they will be like we are now, which is bogus, as we all know. But what it means is that the historical trajectory of Europe, basically the development of the modern society in Western Europe and in North America was not a particular contingent historical process, but was the progress of mankind. And this particular process is seen as universal. And therefore, as the Indian intellectual Ashish Nandi has argued, with this operation, geocultural differences are transformed into historical stages. These other societies, non-Western other societies, are not simply different, but they are as we used to be some centuries ago. So, these differences being transformed into historical stages, we still have the conception that problems are located in the South, problems that are being designated under the term of underdevelopment, whereas the solutions, development knowledge, development experts, development organizations, are being located in the North. And if we have a look at all this, actually the conclusion is quite close, that the project of developing the underdeveloped continued the project of civilizing the uncivilized, which was the project of the colonial era. Now, depoliticizing implications of this concept. It starts with the fact that the unit of analysis is a country being developed or less developed, being ranked on some scale, and this scale apparently indicates the standard of living in this country. Obviously, this obscures the inequalities within this unit of analysis. Second point is that social problems within these units, from the perspective of development discourse, appear as development problems, and these development problems are framed usually as a lack of capital, lack of technology, lack of knowledge, etc., etc. So problems amenable to technocratic solutions. And these solutions are thereby ignoring differences within these unit of analysis, differences between certain groups of the population. An old-fashioned term would be differences between classes. It ignores conflicts of interest, it ignores relations of power, because development interventions are supposed to serve the common good. Now, of course, this is nothing new to people working in the development context, but still these implications of the concept are still present in everyday discourse, if you look at the newspaper or if you look at publications of development organizations. Now, all this leads basically to the question of poverty being reduced to a technical problem. A problem that can be solved by transfer of technology, by investment by multinational companies, etc., by development projects which are, by definition, non-political. The view that the question of poverty can merely be solved by tackling relations of power is being sidestepped in this perspective. Third point, authoritarian implications. It got worse and worse. Now, authoritarian, I mean by that the knowledge about how to achieve a good society, and development is still a symbol for a good society, is based on the idea that there's one conception of a good society, that there is a universal scale of development. Now this is rather controversial because, of course, there are different conceptions of how a good society can look like, and if we have one universal scale, by necessity, other conceptions are being subordinated. Now, and this fits neatly into the fact that these interventions are staged in the name of the common good, legitimated by expert knowledge, and therefore they are possible even against the will of the people. We have, in fact, if we have a look at the history of development policy and development projects, numerous continuous events where the common good was being implemented against the will of the supposed beneficiaries. The most notable example probably being the history of dams. The World Dam Commission, which was by no means staffed by leftists, estimates that there are 40 to 80 million people which have been displaced due to dam projects, forced resettlements, evictions, etc. And only a tiny fraction of them have received compensation, let alone an adequate compensation. So, these people are often seen as environmental refugees nowadays. Developmental refugees might be a more appropriate term. Okay, apart from these implications, I argue that the term or the concept of development leads because it can signify so many different things to misunderstandings which prove to be productive in a certain sense. Misunderstandings which allow people to cooperate despite conflicting aims, despite conflicting worldviews. Development organizations may be, for example, successful in achieving development in the sense of improving agricultural productivity in the context of green revolution, etc. But on the other hand, may fail to achieve development in the sense of reducing poverty. We all know the effects of certain agricultural revolutions which have led to higher productivity for some, but not for all. In this sense, development, is often confused. On the one hand, it's being interpreted as a transition to a modern capitalist industrialist economy. On the other hand, it is interpreted as the amelioration of material want, whereas these two different interpretations may be conflicting or even diametrically opposed in some cases. Now, this leads us to the fact that some development interventions are being supported and conducted by people actually meaning something else. I mean, especially in the context of development non-governmental organizations. We have some organizations which have a fairly radical interpretation of development, talking about empowerment, participation, tackling injustice, etc. Whereas, on the other hand, if they talk to people of bilateral organizations, the World Bank, which have a rather different conception, they still are welcomed by these organizations, saying, fine, you want development? Fine, so do we. So we have something in common. Well, I'd say no. There are crucial differences which are being obscured here. These misunderstandings obscure these political differences and these political conflicts. And I would argue, this is my main point, NGOs should be clear about whether they are working for justice and solidarity or for economic growth and industrialization. Both interpretations of development are still present today. And they should avoid the catch-all term development. Instead, they should break up the consensus that all development organizations are working for the same objective, namely improving the lot of the poor. Now, I would like to conclude with a quote by anthropologist James Ferguson, who said, during the 90s, "It seems to us today almost nonsensical to deny that there is such a thing as development or to dismiss it as a meaningless concept, just as it must have been virtually impossible to reject the concept civilization in the 19th century or the concept God in the 12th. Now, I'm not arguing we should disprove the concept, but we should show that we can do without, and it remains to be seen whether this concept of development will actually survive the 21st century. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Aram, for this very interesting, nice talk on a different level. So I would like to open the discussion and to provide you with the microphone so we can put it here. And please, when you have a question or a statement, please use the microphone and give your name, maybe the organization where you are or for which you are working, and also indicate if it's a question, the person you want to ask this question, because otherwise it might create confusion. Okay. First? Yeah. Which one?
Okay, thank you. I don't know if it's exactly a question, but I'll try to be brief anyway. But that's to state that we had really complementary.
Your name and.
I'm sorry, Eduardo. I work for International Movement ATD Fourth World. So we had. I'm sorry, I forgot the name. Yes, presenting how important it is and to engage in a long time commitment to be with people who have a kind of knowledge that it's important not only for their own community but for the world. Then we have from Pat Mooney many examples how it's difficult to get the world to listen, and specifically the academic world, and to say more, to get it filtering down to development policies, and how that block is also sustained at the level of the conceptual framework of development. So what I state in this, our organization, we are committed for 50 years now alongside people who live in extreme poverty, both in the north and in the south, because we know that development has not eradicated extreme poverty even in the so-called developed countries. So, and we have been, from the beginning, investing a lot in documenting and research with what the people live and their experience and knowledge. So, and then, yeah, we see how hard it is, how often do you see people live in extreme poverty really being actors of research or taken into account in, for example, for the Millennium Development Goals.
Sorry, could
So,
you pose your question?
yes, so it's more than a question, just to say that right now we are in this project to assess the impact of the Millennium Development Goals on people living in extreme poverty in 8 different countries. It's a research action project. We want both to collect their opinions and their experience, but also to dialogue with the academic world and the NGO world. Okay, so thank you very much.
So, okay, thank you. That was more of a statement that we are...
I do have a question.
Okay.
I promise. My name's Carol Cohen. I'm here as a delegate from Adelphi University in New York, and I'm a professor of social work, and my field is international social work with groups. And I can see a theme in addition. I'd love to see the construction around what is group work and what is a group, that all of you, though, I think refer, especially the first 3 speakers, to teams and local teams and local groups. And I'm wondering a little bit of a different question, because I'm running off to facilitate a special interest group in group work right now on 15. And what do you see from the inside, from the members of the local teams? What are they telling you that is essential for their operation? What makes their process work? Do you have some ideas on that?
So, I think this question is posed to
It could be to you, because in Uzbekistan you specifically say it, but I think in India you've also alluded to it, and I wonder when the farmers did come together, what they said they need. Anyone, really?
So maybe Sudarshan?
I think the wisdom of the farmers or wisdom of the indigenous people is there, but creating platforms for them to share is the most important thing. I remember for the development of indigenous people with the same framework, they plan it in Delhi and then impose it on the tribal people. Instead of that, let them in a participatory, all our tribal villages, they make village health plans for them, they plan, and others should assist them. The service providers should assist them. So it has to be their development, and they have wonderful ideas. We should have trust in them, their wisdom, and then only we can find the right solution.
And maybe even finding out what their process is. Ask them first. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. A little similar to what has been said, but I think in Uzbekistan it is quite a specific context. I mentioned the state plan. I mentioned its quite rigid guidelines basically for the farmers being implementers rather than decision makers. And there we encounter the need to create spaces for actual decision making, and that also then of course links with spaces and platforms for opinion raising, etc. But I think the giving the farmers back the right to decide themselves what is best for their land.
And the authority theme.
Yeah.
The power that's weighing on them.
Of course, then the power comes in straight away.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So maybe we can group the questions, maybe three questions after all, and please indicate to whom you want to pose the question.
Okay, Gaston Maskens. I'm with the Center of Ethics and Value Inquiry of the University of Ghent in Belgium. I thank the speakers for your inspiring presentations. In my research, I developed very short what you could call moral reasoning. What would be moral reasoning for sustainable development? And from that perspective, I could actually couple the first presentation with your anecdote on educating people starting in 81 with 6 kids in a hut, and your discourse analysis approach. Because one of the things one of the reasonings I develop in my research is that the right to be educated and to develop a critical sense, so to speak, with the aim to become a vocal citizen and to stand stronger in society. I think that right implies, by definition, a learning environment that is universal in character. So in other words, there can be no cultural specific approaches to individual and collective knowledge capacity building. So if you take that into account, if you agree with that statement, then of course you face a paradox. Because how can we then foster these learning environments with respect for pluralism and cultural diversity? And I think if you agree with this statement, then it would be a good work in a connection between NGO, civil society, and the academy to develop reasonings about that. But first I would like to hear your views on that statement I make here.
Whom are you focusing on?
Well, I would say to everybody, but in the first place to you and then also to the last speaker. So the idea that there can be no cultural specific approaches to knowledge capacity building, starting from the principle of equality for people to develop a critical sense.
Okay. Maybe we can start with Aaron.
Just a short answer. This is actually a tricky question. Because obviously one wouldn't argue that learning is culture specific, but on the other hand, if we understand learning as closely related to school education, then I would argue we are already again in some cultural specific context, because obviously there can be education which has little relation to that, which is demanded if you pass a test at school. And I think this is a very, very crucial question, but I think we should be very, very careful in not universalizing a particular perspective of what education actually is, especially in the context of indigenous populations.
Okay.
Very quickly. I give this example, culture specific. The indigenous people worshipped sun, and I still remember the sun description of my primary education in Bangalore was it's a burning mass of hydrogen. And then I know everything about sun. But in our schools, in our education, the culture specific education, it's the same intuitive experience. They understood that it's the solar energy which sustains their life. They knew it intuitively. Now when you teach science, make that intuitive experience as a scientific framework. That's the same solar energy which is captured in the photosynthesis, and when you eat the food, it's the same energy which is released, and strengthen those intuitive experience. That's what I mean by culture specific. So education need to be, it's not arrogance and all that inbuilt in the form of scientific education that we bring in, but respect for their whatever they had traditionally and strengthen those values. That's that I would define.
But it would be very inspiring for our kids to also know that there are different views on what the sun is.
Okay. I think we can go on, and maybe you can discuss bilaterally later on. Please.
My name is Kanchana Nanset. I live in Germany, but I'm from India. And in Germany, I'm with the German National Committee of UN Women. Mine is not a question, but it's more like comments or maybe indicators where a cooperation could be between the university's research and NGO. But in this, I want to introduce a third actor whom we have not mentioned, and that is the donor. Usually, right now I'm having an identity crisis because my work is in India and my experience comes from India. So I'm also a bit, how shall I say, allergic to the language used in the northern, like stakeholders and backstoppers, etc. So I'll use a very traditional NGO language. Usually what happens by donors, let me also restrict, I'm not talking about ministries in countries, nor am I talking about government donors, but NGO donors like, for example, in Netherlands you have ECO, ED, Christian Aid, who initially did understand, or they felt with the people or partners as they call, who were in the south, and started funding them, say in the 70s or the 80s, with the whole concept of raising the critical awareness of people. In this case, I'll take what you said. We see development work as, raising critical awareness for questions of justice, equality, empowerment, etc., etc. So in this case, when the policy of a donor changes for whatever reasons, whatever constraints, then how does it affect the NGO work? Do they turn or do they continue? And this is where I feel that the academia, together in an open mind, not going with ready-made frameworks, but to work together with the NGOs and the donors and examine policies, whether they still promote justice, empowerment, equality. Thank you.
So we have time for one more comment or question, please.
I try to make it short. My name is Yvonne Orloff, and I'm a member of the Group for Political Education as part of the United Nations Youth Association in Berlin. And I'm also a student for cultural anthropology. And so from my point of view, I would like to relate to what was said about the scientist dilemma you mentioned of either obtaining international reputation for your researchers or to really help the people, the local people, and what we heard about the Eurocentristic concepts. And so I'm referring to the ethics of research, and I would really like to know if there are efforts to kind of translate science data that you gain, and how maybe you can provide these outcomes to the people that have been researched, so that they can, or that they have the possibility to be part of this decision-making process, and that you provide them more or less scientific arguments or this expert knowledge, so that they can reach their own goals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in a wrap-up, in conclusion, I think we identified lots of problems, but also sometimes some ways maybe that in the future we can go, or at least try to go, to make both research and NGO work more working together. And as we heard by Pat Mooney, so these are not different worlds. And so more and more also the donors that sponsor these projects want us to work together. And the question is just how this can be achieved practically. And you also mentioned at the beginning that we have to demystify research. So this is not somebody is coming for 3 days or some weeks just to one village to grab, to steal, so to say, some information and knowledge, and to write it in his PhD and to make a career. So this is how it should not work. And I think there are some projects already. And for example, the Follow the Innovation is one tool, could be one tool for the future. So thank you very much. So I think otherwise we will be thrown out of the room. So I just have to say, this afternoon at 3 o'clock there will be a talk by Mr. Pat Mooney at our institute at the Center for Development Research here in Bonn, Walter Fleckstraße, 3 o'clock. So this will be a side event of this conference, if you are interested. Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presenters. Thank you very much for coming.